we're going to move now to our policy session. I'm going to invite to the stage a number of panelists now to talk about what has been achieved so far in the EU for the energy transition and what's going to happen, what's happening in the global landscape as well in relation to the global landscape. So we're going to have with us today Mechthild Wörsdörfer, I hope I pronounced correctly. She's Deputy Director General for DG Energy. We're going to have Cecilia Tam, she's Head of Energy Investment from the International Energy Agency. We're going to have Craig Douglas, he's Managing Director of the World Fund. We're going to have Jusic from the EBRD. I'm not sure if yes, Annes is there, hello. And we're going to have also Tobias Lechtenfeld from 1.5 Ventures. He's an investor. I don't know if Tobias is in the room. Is he in the room? Okay. But in any case, what the point of this session as well is to, into 2023, we had, it came to an end of, the year came to an end and there was a lot of movement that happened in our energy sector as well. We had the anniversary of REPowerEU, the proposal for energy market design as well, for the electricity market design, the grid and the wind action plan, the COP28 results as well in terms of phasing out fossil fuels, trebling renewable energy. So a number of good developments that we have been seeing happening in the last 2 years actually and related to energy transition. However, in 2023, we also still had disruption in supply chains. After COVID, this is still not fully reestablished. We have competition in relation to external markets as well when it comes to energy investment as well. And we obviously have pressures with multiple challenges in relation to the political, the geopolitical, the financial, and environmental points of view. So we want to discuss these challenges, how the opportunities also that we have right now in the market, and reflect on the role and position of the European Union in this. So I would like to invite our panelists to the stage, and then if you don't mind, just thank you. Okay. Do we have space there, Fanny? Yes. Okay, I'll push this a little bit. Okay. Great. Hi, Tobias. Thank you. Thank you for being here with us today. The idea for this session, what we're going to do is I'm going to ask a question to each one of you. We're going to have your initial intervention. I'm going to go through all the panelists for the questions, and then we're going to open the floor for questions from the audience. So we do have the questions that if you are here, you wish to ask some questions. I believe we also have some people online if they want to ask a couple of questions. We can see if we have time to fit them in. Okay? So I would like to start with Mechthild. And, my main point for you, Mechthild, is after almost 2 years of REPowerEU, the question is the EU on track to reach its objective, to foster the energy transition? So what is happening now?
So first of all, good morning also from my side, and thanks to the team for organizing it. It has been colleagues together with your team. So I think it's an excellent timing, it's an excellent occasion to discuss the crucial point of investments and financing. I will start with your question, what happened since the REPowerEU nearly 2 years ago. I would split it in two. First of all, with the invasion of Russia and Ukraine, we definitely had an unprecedented energy crisis. We saw prices already going up before the invasion, but this was absolutely triggered even more after the invasion. So our first worry out of REPowerEU was first of all security of supply, diversification of gas away from Russia, and then also speeding up clean energy transition and energy efficiency and energy saving. So these were the key objectives of REPowerEU. Now, in 2023, we were not anymore at the peak of the crisis, even though we are very much monitoring both the prices, the security of supply situation, and we even prolonged our emergency measures, which together with the EU member states, we were deciding in 2022. But 2023 then, we, as the Commissioner mentioned, really had an intense work on getting the regulatory framework in energy and climate for 2030. So we even accelerated our targets for renewables and energy efficiency, 42.5 for renewables by 2030. We are at roughly 22, 23. So there is still a long way in the next 6 years to go. Also on energy efficiency, we want to double our renovation rates in the member states and many more. And then also what the Commissioner mentioned, in order to do that, we have also adopted an action plan for grids and also for wind power, just as an example. On the other side, on the security of supply and decarbonization, which remain the top topics, obviously, we had done the decarbonization of gas and hydrogen package. We see a key role in hydrogen, mainly green hydrogen, but also other forms of hydrogen in the energy-intensive sector for them to decarbonize. And we see a role for decarbonized gases in the future, and we want to create and accompany that markets. And the last piece of legislation in terms of what happened last year was the adoption of the electricity market design, which was a key delivery also out of the crisis to, on one side, protect better our consumer, empower them, but also keep the electricity market design as it is, but strengthen it by having longer-term forward-marking possibilities and contracts, encourage PPAs, power purchase agreements between private players, both on the production side of energy, clean energy, and on the consuming side. So there's a lot in that regulatory package, which together with the co-legislators, we adopted last year. We need to deliver on them. I think this is our role together with the member states and the stakeholder. It's top of the priority to deliver on them. And this will also be a priority for the next Commission to continue that work. And I would say, for example, given that we are in the investors dialogue, on the Energy Efficiency Directive, we also have an article on financing of energy efficiency. As we know, energy efficiency is something everyone wants, but it's really difficult to get all the players together. It's an aggregation of a lot of smaller actions, being in insulation of buildings, being in other areas to achieve energy efficiency. So we have one article there on financing of energy efficiency, and together with the member states in December, in the margins of the Energy Council, we launched a coalition on financing for energy efficiency. And that we obviously launched it with our member states, but we need to put it in place together with the players. And I mentioned that as an example because energy efficiency are often also very small projects, so we need to aggregate them and also to find it attractive for investors to invest in them. Another, I think, example is that we are working on grids, and we need these, in particular, electricity grids for the development of renewables. We know that a number of renewables projects, even though we had a record year in solar and wind in 2022 and even 2023 in Europe, that we need the grids to connect where the demand is for this renewable energy. And that's why our action plan on grids comes in. But here, I think we have a little bit of money, the Connecting Europe facility for energy and our Trans-European Network for Energy regulation. But there, I think this is just a drop in the ocean. And I read in the FT this morning that the European Roundtable has urged the Commission to spend the money and the member states on the Next Generation EU, this 800 billion fund, which the Commission started with. And one area in particular, which was mentioned, give more money for electricity grids and do it cross-border. And obviously, we as DG ENER and together with our stakeholder, we would welcome that. I think there's still a lot of missing links in the electricity grids as another example where we work with our member states. We have the CEF money, but it's definitely not enough for the challenges which we have here as well. So these are a few examples where I think we have the regulation, we need to deliver and implement it. We have some financing at EU side We have some national money, but we definitely need more private money, as also the Commissioner mentioned. We have the direction to go 2030. Commission will come up 6th of February with 2040, but all this is in line with becoming carbon neutral by 2050. We have to focus on delivery, as I said. We have to focus on decarbonization, security of supply, but also on energy prices, competitive and affordable energy prices. And I think this will remain a challenge. Prices have gone down since the crisis we saw in August 22 in particular, but they are still slightly higher than pre-COVID. So this remains an issue also in the context of competitiveness. But I stop here, then this is meant to be an introduction, and happy to get questions.
Thank you, Mechthild, for a very comprehensive, actually, introduction of everything that we are touching upon, actually, with the Investors Dialogue, and I believe people will be quite eager to ask you some questions, actually, afterwards. So I'm going to move now to Cecilia. Cecilia Tam, she's a head of Energy Investment Unit from the International Energy Agency. Cecilia, welcome. Thank you. So as the International Energy Agency, you're in a unique position to share a comparative view on how the EU is progressing in the energy transition in relation to other countries, right? So you've been covering many countries globally. What would be particularly interesting to hear is also about the investment attractiveness, right? So we have the IRA from the US as well that caused a lot of discussions here in Europe as well and impact. So how attractive is the EU actually for investment in the sector, and what are the other geographies doing better?
Thanks very much. And I'd like to thank the European Commission for inviting the IEA to this important dialogue and congratulate you for convening this critical group. As we well know, access to finance will be a key criteria for realizing the energy transition at the pace and speed we need to meet global energy and climate goals. Our analysis has shown that there are very positive signs that the transition is accelerating. Although if we are going to meet the broader climate objectives, we need to really accelerate that pace of transition. Our analysis has shown that there are very promising developments globally and within Europe. We have seen very fast developments in transition in the European context, and a lot of investments have been happening over the last decade, with our analysis regularly reporting global breakthroughs in terms of investments in the clean energy sector. Last year, in our World Energy Outlook report, we reported that clean energy investments globally reached 1.8 trillion last year, compared to a trillion of investments in fossil fuels. So this is very encouraging, and every year we are reporting higher figures for energy investments. If we look at the scenario developments that we need to hit for the net zero scenario, we actually need to accelerate that pace of transition from the current 1.8 to $1 in fossil to almost $9 of clean energy for every investment in fossil fuels by the early 2030s. So that that highlights the challenges that we face, but it also represents a significant opportunity to set up our economies in a more sustainable path. And it also highlights the potential for different geographies to benefit from that transition. I think one of the things that we've seen in terms of other geographies and what is really driving investments is really sustained policies. In our discussions with the financial sector, with developers, they're all ready to make the investments in the transition, and funds are flowing to where policy signals are strongest. So if we look at the breakdown regionally of where investments in clean energy are flowing, China stands out as really the leader in clean energy investments. And in our annual World Energy Investment Report, every year we basically report that investments in China continue to lead global developments and outstrip expectations in our own forecasts. The IEA has been regularly upgrading its investments across different areas, particularly for renewable energy, with very rapid investments, not only in renewables development in China, but also very strongly in manufacturing. Just last week, we released our latest renewable energy market report, where we see we've upgraded global forecasts for renewables, as well as for Europe. In China, we continue to see very strong developments in renewables, particularly led by solar PV, where strong and sustained clean energy policies have really led China to be the market leader for clean energy technologies. You also mentioned the US Inflation Reduction Act has been driving a lot of investments, particularly in manufacturing, to the US, unfortunately, in some cases, at the detriment of investments in Europe. Last fall, the IEA, together with the European Investment Bank and the European Central Bank, held a very important conference looking at the competitiveness of Europe, and we convened decision makers from governments, from financial institutions, as well as developers. And participants here really highlighted the need for stronger and more sustained policy in Europe with clear directions. Developers highlighted that the attractiveness of the US IRA was very strong in the sense that where Europe was quite prescriptive in some of its policies, in the US, policies are really driven more to drive emissions reductions, with the market left with more freedoms to decide which technologies would be coming forth. They also cited that access to funding in the US was much more straightforward. It was quicker and more easier to get. In contrast, developments in Europe can be, and funding can be quite slow and cumbersome in its development. Where we have seen strong signals from Europe helping to set out a very good pathway, I think what we found in the tracking of investments is that in the implementation, we're seeing a lot of obstacles which European investors have been facing in terms of aspects that have already been highlighted around speedy access to grid connections, a lot of challenges related to permitting, and inconsistencies with policy development. And I think one of the messages coming from the latest renewable market report, and if we look at what's happened around the world as well as in Europe over the last couple of years, at auction design, with higher interest rates in the current global macroeconomic environment, with higher inflation, rising interest costs, we need to ensure that the policy frameworks are able to adapt to the current global and regional context in terms of higher interest rates. We saw last year a lot of disappointments in terms of different global as well as European auctions, with some not even, for example, in the UK, not bringing forward any bidders because of stringent prices on price caps. And this is where we need to see greater flexibility in terms of future auctions designs to really be able to integrate the realities of higher interest rate environments and what this means for being able to attract more investments in Europe, but also in other jurisdictions. In terms of this broader global transition, I think an important message that the IEA has been emphasizing is that this is a global transition, and while attracting investments into Europe are going to be critical, transitioning Europe will not lead to a global transition. And I think Europe has an important role to play in also supporting broader transitions particularly in the emerging and developing economies. And this will also benefit European technology, European investors, and European developers in terms of also participating in the broader transitions in emerging and developing economies as well. So we see a need for greater international partnerships, collaboration in terms of policy developments, broader sharing of good practices across different geographies, as well as innovations in financial instruments that can support broader investments, not only in Europe, but also in developing and emerging economies. I'm going to stop here, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Cecilia, for this global view as well, and counterpointing what we have in Europe and abroad. So we'll come back, I hope. I would like now to invite Anis Jusic, Senior Banker from the EBRD, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. And Anis, so as the EBRD, you are quite active in regions that are actually still heavily reliant on fossil fuels, on hydrocarbons, on economies that really depend on them, in particular, for example, Central and Eastern Europe, and also the EU neighboring countries as well. So for these countries, more than actually for others, the energy transition is not only a matter of tackling the climate crisis, but it's also a matter of ensuring that the path towards net zero does not come with a heavy social cost in terms of loss of jobs, companies closing, loss of income as well. So when it comes to mobilize the necessary investments for energy transition in these countries, where do you see the main bottlenecks, and what measures, in your experience, have been the most effective in this direction?
Thank you.
Thank you.
So just quickly to put it into perspective for everyone geographically, so EBRD doesn't operate in Western Europe. We operate in sort of, say, eastern part of Europe, so from Poland northwards and Baltics down towards south to Western Balkans, and we kind of stop at Ural Mountains, and that of course includes Ukraine, and it's a major part of our remit currently. What you mentioned is, it effectively is relevant to all of our countries of operation. So going from Poland down to Western Balkans, the fossil fuel element and getting rid of it is a particular issue for all our countries. Even more so for the southern part of our region, the Western Balkans. I will say a couple of things which are probably relevant to all of them, and then maybe touch upon the southern part of our region, where it's even more pertinent than in the north. So I'd say capacity is a pretty big issue, and actually I don't mean capacity on the grid, which I will refer to as another issue itself, but more human capital capacity and implementation capacity. What you tend to see in our region is perhaps people like myself, for reasons of self-affirmation, for reasons of financial benefit, or for reasons for being surrounded with like-minded people, and so they can coexist in an environment that is happy and like-minded, move away from jobs that actually are relevant to this change, to this decarbonization. So people move away from authority jobs, from ministries that are relevant, from regulatory bodies, from TSOs, which are in public hands, from DSOs, and so on and so forth. And yet those are still key and critical players. Sorry, still key and critical players in the industry that are relevant to the change. And then that effectively contributes to the problem that kind of exists in Western Europe as well, which is the huge complexity around the permitting procedures, on getting projects done, involving all layers of authority and hence bureaucracy, corruption to a meaningful extent as well, especially in some parts of our region, and so on and so forth. That also leads to the other capacity issue, the grid capacity issue, lack of insight, lack of push on the grid side to be innovative, and on the regulatory side to incentivize the grid operators to behave in such a way, and then lack of drive due to this human capital capacity issue on the grid side to actually push the regulators to think differently. I will perhaps touch upon it both as a way to mitigate it and as a bottleneck. Educating the public is something that needs to be done more consistently, more proactively, and more decisively in terms of public understanding the benefits of the changes being implemented, and definitely attributing huge value or huge cost to some of the aspects they don't see necessarily as a cost, but it definitely, like, health, improvement in health or in conditions of living, which unless it's directly related to how much money people possess, people don't necessarily associate with cost. There's actually a fair few other things that I wanted to say. In terms of effectiveness of things, actually, Cecilia just mentioned, and something that I would very much reiterate: clarity in policy, and clarity in regulatory environment, and consistency in it. To be honest, I think it's important so that you consistently sort of show delivery on your promise. Particularly pertinent for again, sort of Western Balkans. The problem with all of this, to be honest with you, is I feel, again, possibly somewhat relevant to Western Europe as well, is the short-termism in the thinking, especially in politics. We have obviously been hit with various kinds of significant events that has sort of exacerbated that problem even more. So it's very hard to convince politicians, especially in our countries of operation, to develop long-term strategies, to develop long-term thinking, and to convince the public of that. Because if they are not perceived or seen as immediately reacting to the fires in front of them and dealing with it in a decisive manner, they believe their days are numbered, and usually their days are numbered at the turn of the next cycle if they haven't been doing so. So to be honest, that is another big problem. But particularly, I think, entrenched in Western Balkans and in our regions, because there is effectively, I would say, also a significant lack of incentive from the EU or from the international partners, and possibly a too long a list of conditions to make things happen. I think that's kind of the main things that I wanted to say. Obviously, things like opening the markets up and increasing interconnectivity has a huge role to play. Again, especially in the Western Balkans, for example, or EU energy community countries, where the markets are still nascent. And the exchanges are only being developed now. but that's developing slowly again through that sort of, because of that embedded lack of trust that exists very much between the countries in that region inherently, and then amplified by what's happening around us. It's very hard to get parties to work towards mutual goals. I have a little time left, but another perhaps somewhat controversial things to say, but things can be done more decisively in countries that have access to gas. In Western Balkans, it's very hard to have these conversations with authorities. Oh, you should decarbonize, and you should make these consistent plannings about how you should, plot the way with auctions and everything else. But I'm afraid there's very few of us who can help you how to navigate the period between now and in 10, 15 years' time. Most of these countries don't have a significant access to gas, and it's hard to have a conversation where you tell them, well, we can't help you with modernizing your coal plants, you should decommission them. We can't help you with gas. It's difficult for most of us. You should all do batteries, loads of them, and perhaps be innovative about them as well, and create the different kind of batteries that don't exist at this point in time. So I'll finish there.
Thank you, Ernest. Thank you very much. So it's a very integrated problem and social transition as well, right? I'm going to move now to Craig Douglas. Welcome, Craig, founding partner from the World Fund. And you've been also a member of the working groups as well in the Investors Dialogue. So I'm going to have a question for you, which is, the World Fund has been actually looking at the climate tech funding gap, which is a topic we talk a lot about as well. So where do we stand in the EU in terms of funding for innovation, energy innovation? And where do you see the main needs, the main bottlenecks, and what could the public sector do to better resolve them?
Thanks very much for that. Morning, everyone. I'll try and keep things relatively brief so we can get into some more interesting questions from the audience. In terms of where we stand today in Europe, we're really good at R&D. A third of the world's patents in climate and energy come from Europe, more startups in Europe than the US and China combined. We're really good at the early stage stuff. We're awful at getting it to growth, right? Looking at the growth rounds that happened, 100 million plus rounds that happened in energy and climate tech companies. I think it was 60-something% of the capital came from North America, right? We're really bad at getting things to scale, and we're reliant on other people to get us there. So where we really lack in Europe is that growth phase. So we can get things to R&D, but that first full-scale project, that first full-scale plant, that's where we really lack the capital and where there's a bit of a risk gap. There's some larger side infrastructure funds now, but they're not willing to take technical risk. There are some other types of financing structures available, but we have issues with regards to that early stage, first of a kind projects. So I'll get into a little bit in terms of the potential ways around this. One of the things I will say here is you can finance pretty much anything if you can give certainty. And that's kind of the comments earlier. Like, you give certainty on policy, you give certainties on outcomes, you can drive entire markets, and you can leverage a huge amount of private sector capital. You don't actually need that much public sector capital to do that. Whether it's in energy generation, contracts for difference have been hugely valuable in driving particularly the UK offshore market, offshore wind, apart from last year's auction, which, by the way, the government now, realized, and they did an open book test with a couple of the people, and they realized, oh yeah, actually, we're going to have to increase our auction price quite significantly. So whether it's contracts for difference for energy generation, whether it's technical guarantees for first-of-a-kind projects, because people are willing to fund projects, but banks are typically not willing to take technical risk. So if there's still technical risk, giving at least a technical guarantee that allows a project to be financed. And that could be through a grant facility, it could be through a first loss facility, or form a real technical guarantee for percentage outcome or percentage savings. That can really drive external capital to come in. And then there's only public money steps in when the technology doesn't quite meet its expectations. So it's actually a really cheap way of getting a huge amount of capital to be deployed. The same is true, for example, for first loss facilities. So you can see this in the battery industry, where like Northvolt, where the European money stepped in and basically says, we're happy to be, if anything goes wrong, we'll take the first loss. And speaking to the people, some of the people who financed that basically said, we can't really lose money on this. And what happened? $1 billion plus rolls into that company, right? So the money is out there, the money is capable. We're at about $1 trillion today, I think, is, in terms of amount that we're investing in the space. We need to get that to about 6 trillion, so a 6-fold increase over the next decade. It's not crazy, right? It's hard, but it's not crazy. And the way that we can do that is to give certainty and make sure that that capital can actually be deployed at scale quickly. And here is where the Inflation Reduction Act in the US has been really valuable, because it's basically a cheat sheet. You look at it and you go, this is how much I can get for a carbon price. This is how much I can get for a tax break if my technology is successful. And that's guaranteed for a long period of time. So I know as a technology developer or an investor in new technologies, I meet that requirement, I know I can get funding. Now, in Europe, we can't do that at the global European level. We cannot provide tax breaks. We can do it at the regional level, and all of these other things, the CFDs, the first loss facilities, the technical guarantees, they're not ideal, but they are real viable alternatives to allow the private sector to get scale quickly with minimal intervention from the public sector capital. So that's what I would like to see more capital going into, and trying to find other areas of capital and being certain about where it's coming from. When we're looking at first companies, where we're looking at first facilities, a lot of what we're doing is going after grants, because at the moment that's really the only capital that's available. The issue there is it's an exceptionally opaque process, and we don't necessarily know if those grants are still going to be there. Europe's a bit more consistent on that, but the regional side of things, we have a battery company that's in battery recycling that applied for a German grant, and that program, as of last week, was exceptionally uncertain, and now it appears that we will actually, on the battery recycling, be able to make that happen. But from a company that's currently raising 50 million in equity for building the plant, that wants to get another 50 million in grant funding to make it bigger, that's a huge risk, right? There are better ways of doing these things. So that's what we're all here to discuss. So I'll shut up and get on to some more interesting questions.
Thank you so much, Craig. So keyword for you is certainty, right? Okay, so Tobias Lechtenfeld from 1.5 Ventures. Hi, Tobias, welcome. You're a partner and senior director in climate policy and strategy. I do not have the full title here, so welcome. So question for you is that as 1.5 Ventures, you have been working on an initiative to set up an investment tool to mobilize investments from large institutional investors for energy projects. We know institutional investors are more risk averse. They are looking a lot for certainty as well. It's a different approach than actually the type of investments that Craig is doing, for example, as well. So tell us a bit more about why, and why is this needed as well, and how do you convince them actually to invest more?
Fantastic. Thank you so much, and good morning, everyone. So 1.5 Degrees Ventures, I think the name is our focus. We're a venture studio that's actually trying to build some of these, what Craig described as these innovators in the energy space and climate tech space. But I'm also wearing the hat of energy, of head of strategy and climate finance with the Energy Resilience Leadership Group, and that's really where this is an initiative that came together about a year ago for pretty much the entire European economy, driven by some really big names, including here from the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, Bill Gates was there, corporate sector was there, and they said, look, we need to step up the game in projects we need to decarbonize project by project, but we need to do more, right? And so very quickly, this actually yielded some large projects. We see now the first ones, you know, in the energy storage space that's starting to stabilize the European grid by shutting down coal plants and replacing it with battery storage facilities. So really, I think very much going in the right direction. I think that first one is, 14 gigawatts of renewables, 3 gigawatt hours of battery storage capacity, and 2 gigawatts of green hydrogen, just in one former coal plant in Eastern Germany. So I think that's the right step. Very quickly you realize, though, if you're bringing in new battery technology, kind of the latest, cutting edge, cheapest in many ways, and greenest battery technology, a bit like the batteries that Craig was describing, you're climbing a very steep hill to get that financed. Yeah, so it's not about the price point per se. We also have seen this in the solar energy, right, where the price points came down over 30 years. Now we want to see the same in battery and technology in, 5 years? In hydrogen and other technologies also in 5 years, ideally, and not in 30. We can only do that through like permanent innovation and replacement, and I think this is where we're having some structural challenges across the board. But let me start off with some good news, now that you have a bit of a background on who's speaking here. So I think on the broader spectrum, the really good news is that in Europe we have everything that we need for net zero, in my view. We have so we have very clear political targets. We know exactly where we need to be. We have a fairly strong economy that is actually able to generate a lot of productivity, a lot of resources that we can reinvest. And we have, exactly as others have said, we have an extremely excellent, stellar, world-leading R&D class that has been, especially over the last 10 years, really shifted attention into energy, into climate, into net zero technologies. And the result of that is that, very different from 5 years ago, we're now at a position where we're suddenly seeing not one or two promising companies going into mass manufacturing, we're seeing dozens. And we're starting to see hundreds in the next few years. What we haven't seen is the financial market grasping that opportunity. So I would differ a little bit to what Craig was saying, that it is very much about risk appetite, and structuring these investment deals. But for me, this is not necessarily just a job for the taxpayer or public institutions to fix, but it's really about, and this is where I would look to the US and say, so how can we organize our funds, our deals, but also our asset classes in a way that we are capable of embracing infrastructure projects that are a bit smaller in size initially, because it's first of a kind, second of a kind production facility, that have from the outset perhaps some sort of technical risk, even though that's a very broad term that is not sure if that actually holds if you chop it down into its components. And how do we structure then the de-risking of that? And I think when we look at the resources that we need to decarbonize the economy, basically reindustrializing all of Europe, well, I don't think it makes sense to even look at the public purse, because that's largely empty. Right, the only purses that are out there are purses with the insurance industry, maybe some of the funds in asset management. And so the question then becomes, for me, much more, how do we build a bridge from, let's say, the insurance industry, 1 or 2% of the insurance assets, and how can we bring that into infrastructure projects, but the early stage ones preferably? That's a tricky one, but I would just challenge the combined intellect in the room that I think we can do that. I think that's definitely possible. I think we have what it takes, the structured funds. And sure, there might be a need for a de-risking function of a public institution, but I would always want to start with the private vehicle first, and then we see where the government or an EIB or someone would be needed. So I think we have, if you look at the capital stack in these technologies, when they come out of R&D and they move into the market and then they move into production, we have the very brave, and Craig being one of them. So VC money, full risk. We know only one out of 10 survives. that is really brave to throw money at innovations where you know from the beginning not every horse will even make it to the finishing line, and very few will be exceptionally strong coming through. So chapeau to that. Then we know we have banks that with a little bit of de-risking, talking loan guarantees, what we're discussing with the EIB, manufacturing guarantees, banks can be, with a bit of carrot and a stick, can be lured to the table, and banks begin issuing loans. And we've seen it with the Northvolts that, once you have reached a certain level of profitability, of course you can access bank loans. No more need for government grants at that stage, hopefully. But then if you really want to ramp up, if you're talking gigafactories for electrolyzers, for any type of energy production, transport or storage, well then the banks are not going to cut it for you. You really need a different type of investment partner. And here we're talking, think of this, what is a typical production investment, right, for a facility like that? 15 years, let's say? Low risk, low return, steady return. To me, that sounds like insurance expectations. Right? It's a long-term investment. It's much longer than the average VC fund would roll, but it's relatively predictable. It has a recurring revenue. There's off-takers on the table. So I think in terms of bringing these asset classes together, I think there's a lot we can actually do, and this is what we're trying to throw our weight behind and really invite insurance groups from across the continent to say, well, let's join the conversation. Because if you think of an investment opportunity, energy and climate tech is probably the largest investment space of the century. So being part of that, I think, does make a lot of strategic sense, also in terms of foresight. I mean, we're seeing big groups like the BlackRocks going right in and even buying, investment funds just in the last weeks. But we also see very, I would say, open-minded and foresighted banks, such as ING, BNP, really moving into the space very quickly, and I would really like to applaud them for that, because it is not an easy territory to maneuver, and to even get clarity among all the different uncertainties that are potentially out there, but to develop a clear commitment and strategy in how to close that funding gap. And I think once we have more firing power, so larger investments, both in the equity but also in the non-equity space, and we can actually start committing to financing European gigafactories for these clean technologies, we can take a significant market share, not just here, but globally, and actually replicate to some degree what we've done in the past century. Our wealth is based on exporting and developing, building and exporting strong technologies, right? This is what a large part of Europe is famous for. And I think we have this opportunity in climate technologies again, and I think a large part of the solution is the insurance industry and other type of investment groups. Let's open up the debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Tobias. And interesting, you are positive about the framework conditions then for clean investment in Europe. So let's make it happen. I would like to open the floor to questions. So we do have a couple of floating mics that my colleagues can bring to you. So the gentleman here, and then we have a gentleman at the back afterwards. And just one point for you, we have about 15 minutes for Q&A, so then I'll stop. If there are only online questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Vladimir Kubeček. I'm from ČEPS, Czech Electricity TSO. You were talking here, the whole panel, about investment mainly on the supply side and in infrastructure. What we are seeing in numbers is, we need more investment into grids, but what we are seeing from numbers is that the electrification doesn't speed up. The consumption of electricity in Europe is pretty flat from 2010. What I am seeing is there is a disbalance between the supply and demand. And I would like to see where are the policies for more electrification. I see EV, heat pumps, that might help, but it's still not materializing. And this leads to increased cost, and I'm from regulated business, to increased cost for final consumers. And if I say this to my owner, which is the government, that I will charge more, they will say, why? You know, you are increasing price of electricity, and this is a political suicide. And we need to look also at this on policies which will balance the increase in investment, but also increase in consumption of electricity. Otherwise, this leads to a big increased cost per unit. Of course, there might be energy efficiency, which will decrease the overall energy bills, but this people are not seeing this for the moment. So I'd like to see your opinion on this issue. Thank you.
Who would like to?
I'll jump in. Maybe just this is really regional dependent more than anything else, I think, right? Because I mean, I live in the Netherlands, right? We have the opposite issue. Like, everyone's trying to use more power and are basically being told by the TSOs, no, you're not allowed to, right? So the question here is, like, there are areas which already have this problem and have been having this problem for a decade, and there are other areas that are having to invest ahead of the increased electrification. And I fully appreciate that that is a challenge to do. All I can say is try and point to the markets where this is already a problem and highlight that you will not be able to scale fast enough once it actually starts hitting its acceleration phase. I mean, there's some great examples in the Netherlands. I think that the first time this happened was in The Hague. And The Hague said that we're going to put in twice as many electric vehicle charging points in the city. And the TSO turned around and said, you can't do that. We don't have the infrastructure to be able to do it. And they just turned around and said, this is your problem, get on with it. Right? So, but that's in a city that has a huge amount of additional electrification now versus 10 years ago. Right? So the electricity demand there has gone up hugely. So I don't have a solution for you other than to, try and point into the areas where this has already had huge impacts and where the grid connections are actually causing the largest bottleneck in increased both generation and in increased electrification use. And we already have this problem with some of our industrial facilities. So on the Belgian-Dutch border, we're trying to get an additional 60 kilowatt connection. Sorry, 60 megawatt connection for an industrial site. I mean, you think, surely that's not a problem. That's not a huge amount of power. You either get it now, or we're not going to be able to get it for 10 years. So this company cannot grow its industrial facilities. Like, they either have to apply and get the connection today for 6 million, or they're not going to be able to get it for a decade. That is fundamentally a problem for actually increased growth of some of our or increased electrification and adoption and decarbonization. Yeah.
Thank you. I would also say that it's true, traditionally we were looking more on the supply side, but I think also in our legislation, I mentioned the Energy Efficiency Directive, obviously, which is about more and efficient use of energy, but we have it also in the electricity market design. We have some encouragement for demand-side flexibility. It's not yet there, but we try really to cover and encourage it. And there are different examples in our member states where these measures, and we will push them further, are really gaining more traction. So I think electrification will continue in the transport sector and needs to continue, first of all, for decarbonization and many other reasons. And the sectors which are, for the moment, quite difficult in that is the transport sector. It's really very much oil dominated. We are getting in electric vehicles, and some member states are doing better than others. There is a non-EU member state who is the leader in, which is Norway, but in all other parts, I think the same for heating. Heat pumps are catching up, but still, we are not yet there where we need to be. So there are a couple of elements in our legislation, in our action plans, to encourage also demand-side measures and electrification in the future.
Thank you very much. I think we can move to the next gentleman that would like to ask a question. If anybody would like to ask a question after, okay. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Sanjay Kumar, the Head of Policy at the European Geothermal Energy Council. Fascinating conversation. I wish I could carry on all day long. From our perspective, and actually I want to push back a little bit on what Anna said, we see a lot of local authorities who are trying to plan geothermal heating and cooling networks. These are massive projects for small cities, for small regions, and for them they have two problems. The first one is that they're not sure whether it's advantageous to be classified as an energy project or an infrastructure project, because you have to do both. You have to create find the geothermal resource and then build a network to supply it to the customers. So we kind of fall in that stock. So from our perspective, what we're really looking for is targeted finance, not big numbers like America is and cheat sheets like Craig mentioned, but actually very targeted things where there's upfront finance to support a technical feasibility study for a large city. Business models already exist. How we've overcome these challenges in the past is that we've been quite innovative in the ways in which we developed public-private partnerships and joint ventures. But what we now need is a combination of two things. One, some form of financial de-risking, which is not subsidies. We're not looking for subsidies. We're looking for a way in which you can address the upfront capex and the risk that the deeper resource may not be there. That's a different type of risk insurance. There's a good example in a few member states. What we want to know is can this be scaled up to a European level? Because in some countries, Croatia is a classic example. 16 local authorities want to build geothermal district heating systems. The energy's there. They cannot get a risk because the finance minister said for Croatia, the country is just too small to set up a risk mitigation scheme just for that. So if we can Europeanize that, then we can go much quicker than we've ever done before. And then the second one is, and this is quite a problematic one, but it's been mentioned briefly. We live in a time where cheap money doesn't exist anymore. So you have huge interest around that, and you have huge uncertainty around the supply chains that need to be built up around that. So from our perspective, what we need to have is less money, but actually much more of a political signal to allow institutional investors like Tobias, people like Craig, and to come into our sector and actually help local authorities build large projects which are big for them, but may not necessarily be big for a big company, for example, as well. So we've got to target the finance towards the customer rather than towards the supplier, is what I'm trying to say. What kind of thinking and what kind of best practices do you see in other countries or across Europe that could be used for our sector? Thank you.
Okay, so de-risking, financial de-risking escalating at EU level. And
well, I was called out, but I'm not sure where we exactly disagree on. Well, first of all, it's hard. For example, for us, like an institutional investor, to dedicate seriously to it because of, again, resourcing. Like, dedicating ourselves to 16 different authorities just in Croatia, as you mentioned, is a challenge where we don't have the adequate resource as an institutional investor to sort of throw our weight behind it. So that's one aspect that I think countries directly need to be also reminded of, and we work with the countries to sort of pull together these things so that, as you say, the size of it is significant enough to attract attention both from institutional investors and the private sector. At EBRD, we actually have this specific program called Green Cities Program, which is kind of our flagship program. And I think we have a couple of cities in Croatia, for example, Split and Zadar, I think, where we are throwing resources behind things like that, where we're working with the cities to develop frameworks, legislative frameworks, as well as sort of contractual frameworks which create robustness and bankability and investability into these. Not all, obviously only related to geothermal, but any other type of solution that obviously delivers decarbonization and delivers efficiency. But it's again, to be honest with you, despite it being flagship, it's hard going. It's hard going, and I have to go back to also that capacity issue in sort of having the right capacity on the authority side, despite their willingness to sort of motor through with these things without the support of government. or else. And one pertinent problem which I didn't touch upon earlier is, unfortunately, the IFIs or the international community can also be its worst enemy as well. Sort of we sometimes compete with each other, you know, as to who has the best idea or who has the best solution for the country or for the city or so on and so forth. And we fall over each other to sort of, you know, deliver something, but ultimately nothing gets delivered because the authorities are also completely confused, like, oh, well, you know, these guys said this is best for me, and these guys have said that. And despite multiple efforts to find alignment, often there seems to be, and that's something we definitely need to improve upon and work on as well. That's what I would say on that.
Thank you. Cecilia, did you want to say something? Take the question now. Yes? Okay. So we have time for one more question. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sebastian Canero. I'm CEO of Solas Capital, and we manage an infrastructure debt fund dedicated to energy efficiency investments, which is backed by the EIB and also benefits from a credit loss guarantee provided by the European Commission. So it's a blended finance product. And I think it's a nice showcase that through public money, which is actually only an 8 million budget for the guarantee, you can crowd in 220 million euro of institutional capital. So it's a mechanism that works. And I don't really have a question. I just want to add to the discussion the view from an infrastructure investor, just to complement the views of Tobias and Craig. So I just, maybe with the projects we finance, they range from heat pumps within the residential sector, heat pumps in the industrial sector. We do public street lighting. We do upgrades of heating systems in residential area, and we do a lot of on-site PV generation, so self-consumption projects. And earlier it was said that you know we need to find the banks, the insurances to invest in those projects, and that's absolutely right. But in my experience, because we're looking at new business models in the energy transition, you know, that's a big hurdle. Banks, you know, they don't take risks. They lend against security. So if you have a new business model, if you don't have track record of 5 years, if you don't do 100 million a year, don't speak to a bank. Right. So with insurances, again, insurances have liabilities they need to match. They are quite similar to banks in this regard. So this is why there's a huge space in the market gap, which needs to be filled by alternative lenders like ourselves. So I just wanted to add that to the conversation that banks can play a role in some areas, but to support new business models, we need dedicated support mechanisms to crowd in institutional capital.
Thank you. Any reactions to that? No? Yeah.
Yeah, I would love to agree, actually, and maybe we can have a follow-on chat. This is excellent. I think we would love to see many more of those type of vehicles to really fill the market gap. And for us, the benchmark is really the US here, saying, whatever is possible in terms of liquidity, not just in terms of valuation, but in terms of liquidity and bridging, you know, breaking the silos between the VC world, the bank world, and then, you know, the infrastructure world, because we have huge gaps in between those, and it's extremely hard to jump that gap as a company that is, you know, new on the market and has all kinds of other liabilities. So great you're doing that, and yeah, let's get together. Hopefully there's more to join that. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I think we are coming to the end of our panel. Obviously, we have 5 working groups here, right? So multiple perspectives as well, you know, from innovation investment, from the infrastructure, from local authorities and consumers and so on. So I think that we had a very broad picture here of, you know, everything that's touching upon, the regulatory framework, the investment conditions, the competition globally, the work of the EU, the work in just transitions regions. So I hope this was interesting. I think we have the chance now to talk during the coffee break. So I invite you to stay, have a coffee, engage with our panelists as well. And after we come back for the technical session 1, where we're going to be talking about the results from the working groups. So thank you very much. Thank you to the panel.